Hello, my name is Nathaniel Mills, and today we're going to demonstrate the visual analytics for governance, risk, and compliance. This was first of a kind work done in 2014. We're using Chrome to do the demonstration, but it also runs in Internet Explorer 11, Safari, and Firefox. Risks are generally organized in different taxonomies. Here we're looking at a business unit taxonomy for global financial services that has regional business units and then further breaks into functional business units. We can also look at the business processes for global financial services. I'll adjust the tree depth so that we can see down to 4 levels. We can also look at the risks according to risk assessment taxonomy. It has a similar breakdown by region. Here we're looking at the risk overview that summarizes your risk position. They're colored with red being very high risk rating and green being very low risk rating. They have numerical values from 4 to 1. Here we're looking at the taxonomies for processes, organizations, and risk assessments as columns. Each of the rows reflects the average ratings for inherent at the top, residual risk ratings, and then the change from inherent to residual. The change shows colors from blue for a very good position all the way through dark red for remaining in a very high risk position. Here we see on the risk assessment taxonomy, one of the risk assessments is still rated very high. It has a red change color. Flying over it, we can see some of the details about that risk assessment. If we click on the risk assessment, we get a dialog that shows us the various ratings and the change magnitude as well as the controls that are in play and their ratings. There is a total of 312 risks being shown at this point. However, if we want, we can set filters to focus our attention, and one of the ways we can set filters is in this dialog, click on the Apply Filter button. Now we see only the risks associated with that risk assessment. There are a total now of only 9 risks being reflected in the risk overview, and you can see that up in the upper right corner where the number is showing the amount of risks in play. We're going to switch visual analytics now to the risk map. This summarizes your risk position according to the inherent risk ratings. Each column shows inherent risk ratings. We're looking at the very high column now, and the circles represent groups of risks with different numbers of controls. The smaller circle reflects risks that have a higher number of controls. Here these have 4 controls, and the risk ratings stay very high. The larger circle shows risks that have only 1 control associated with them. The higher the circles on the chart, the more the risk position has changed. Here we can see the risk position has achieved very low risk rating, and here we see in the inherent risk we've gone from very high to high, so it's a little bit higher than the other circles we were looking at. Next, we're going to explore the relationship of controls to risks and the various taxonomy elements. So here we see the risks in the center of the display, colored by their inherent rating and residual rating on top and bottom. Flying over these, we can take a look at the individual risks and see their ratings. We can see the top and bottom here are different colors reflecting a very high inherent rating and a high residual rating in orange. Here we see the various controls. These also have ratings for design effectiveness and operating effectiveness. Design is theory, operating is practice. This control shows green at the top for effective design effectiveness and red at the bottom for ineffective operating effectiveness. We've highlighted the path from the control to the risk. You can also take a look at all of the control paths to the risk. Notice the different colors. These are the operating effectiveness ratings. 2 are green for effective, 1 red for ineffective, and 1 gray for not determined. Notice some of the lines are solid color and some of the lines are striped. These reflect the different relationships between a parent and child. Solid are primary relationships, and if we click on this filter, we'll be able to see only those primary relationships. A secondary relation means that it has influence over the parent, but it's not owned by the parent. So here's a secondary relationship at the top. We can change the display to focus on the business entities and their relationship to the risks. Here you can see there are two business entities that tie back to the risks. You can see that this risk is shared between two different business entities. We can also take a look at the business processes that are affected by these risks. While business processes may not be rated directly, we're showing the average of the risks associated with them. Going back and looking at the business entities, we see we have commercial banking and finance, and if we go back to the taxonomy for business units, the left half shows finance and the right half shows commercial banking, as shown in the pop-up at the bottom of the screen. If we want to take a look at these risks in different format, we can move to risk clusters. Here, each of the circles represents a risk, and strung off of those risks are the controls. Remember the one risk that had the 4 controls associated with it, where 2 were ineffective, 1 was effective, and 1 was not determined? That's what these smaller circles are that are strung off of that risk. The colors of the risks reflect their inherent risk rating on the left side and their residual risk rating on the right side. Releasing the filter that we had on the risk assessment, we're now taking a look at all of the risks that are identified for global financial services. From this bird's eye perspective, we can see how the risks have different ratings and have different control patterns associated with them. Here are some risks that have a lot of controls associated with them, and here we see risks that have no controls associated with them. We can use the filters and apply them to the risk counts. Here we'll look at all of the risks that have at least 5 controls associated with them. And we can also add in the risks that have no controls by choosing 0. We now have 2 filters in play, with the risks without controls showing at the top of the screen. Releasing the filter for 0 shows us the heavily controlled risks again. And the colors again reflect the inherent risk rating on the left and the residual risk rating on the right. Here's one that is medium with the yellowish color on the left and low for residual on the right as green. We can go back and look at the risk map now for these and see only the circles reflecting the high control counts. I'll fly over a risk that began as medium and ended as medium, as you can see in the flyover below. Moving back to the risk clusters, we can see these highly controlled risks. It might be interesting to figure out where they are across the different business entities. So we can go back to the Sankey visual analytic that focuses on relationships. Here we'll look only at the business entities, and scrolling down we can see that retail banking seems to have the majority of the risks with these high control counts. So it might be interesting to focus now on retail banking. We can do this by opening our filter panel, moving into the business entity taxonomy, and selecting retail banking. Now we see that that's the only business entity that is shown in the Sankey diagram. Moving back to the risk overview, we see that there's only one business entity reflected, that's retail banking. If we release the filter for the control counts, we can see now that we're looking at over 60 risks. And if we look at how those distribute across the inherent risk ratings and how well we've been able to mitigate those risks, for the most part we've done quite well. The least mitigated risks are at the bottom here. We see one that started high and ended high, and the more improved risks are at the top where they achieve a low rating status. The middle are medium rating status. Here though is a problem where we show risks that started low and ended up in a worse condition. Here we see it went to medium rating. This is probably an error, and we may want to get a look at what those risks are within retail banking. So we'll set a inherent risk rating filter at low and a residual risk rating at medium. And now we have this focus on those risks. Let's take a look at the control pattern on these risks. I'll zoom in a little bit to make it easier to see them, and I'll close the filter panel. So here we see that some of these risks have ineffective controls, but some of the controls are effective. Let's go take a look at them in the Sankey diagram. And here we can see the top of the risk shows low in darker green and medium in light green. So these are risks that are problematic. If we click on the number of risks up here, we can see what those risks look like in a grid. And indeed their inherent rating is low and their residual rating is medium. We can click on the link for the risk and go into Open Pages to make corrections. We can also export these risks into an Excel spreadsheet, which I'll do right here, so that we could load these risks into Excel, add notes, maybe paste them in an email for someone to take action to correct this rating problem. You'll see we've exported the URL to make it easier for them to navigate to take corrective action. We also show the full path where these risks are located. Let's go into the filters and release these filters on the ratings. So now we're looking again at all of the risks for retail banking. We'll go back to the risk overview and see the distribution of the ratings across the inherent, residual, and change. This is a different visual analytic to show the controls against a time frame. We're looking at the larger controls were the ones that have been modified most recently, probably having been tested. We can also go back and see which are the controls that haven't been acted on over a period of time. We also have a report card that allows us to compare and contrast different business. We can scroll through the business entities and choose one to look at. Here we're looking at the RCSA staging hierarchy. For demonstration purposes, we'll pick the same business unit, but we'll go back and take a look at only the primary relationships on the right side. Around the outside of the circle are the controls in light blue and the business process that they are affecting. At the bottom we see a grid that compares and contrasts the design effectiveness and the operating effectiveness ratings. There are more controls shown on the left than on the right, and we can see here that there are 4 controls that are ineffective both in design and operating effectiveness. Clicking on that will display a list of those controls. On the right there's only one that has this situation, and we can see that at the bottom, whereas on the left side we see all 4 controls that were being referenced. On the right, by focusing only on primary relationships, we see there are only 2 controls that this business unit is responsible for that they can correct. Changing now to a different concept, we're going to take a look at key risk measures and how they cluster based on correlation over time. You can see there are clusters of key risks measurements. The dots are the key risk measures, and the links between them show the correlation strength. If we click on one, we can see the different key risk measures that make up a cluster. If we want to see how these key risk measurements were taken over time, we switch to the time series measurement. Here we see those key risk measures reflected over the past 48 months. Correlation is based on the current month as well as the previous and 2 periods before. And here we see that the correlation is strongest for the middle time series by moving 1 month out, and on top it's better correlated by shifting it 2 months out. You can also see that the middle line tends to be closer in the pattern to the bottom than the top line is. We can see this on the risk clusters if we go in and change the correlation strength. So here was that cluster we looked at before, and the correlation strength between these two, as seen in the bottom, is 0.51, and the other correlation strength is 4.2. So if we want, we can change the correlation strength used to form these clusters by moving over to the dialog on the right and changing the correlation strength to 0.43. This changes what we're focusing on and gets rid of any of those weaker correlations. So now we can see that for that old cluster there are only 2 members now, and we can go back and look at those 2 time series to see those 2 timelines that we thought appeared more similar than the third. We have another visual analytic that allows you to use some text searching to find similar risks or controls by entering text, and we look at the descriptions of these elements, and here show that we found what we were looking for. We refine our search a little better by choosing LAUND for laundering, and we can see what those are. The title column is a link that allows us to click and move directly into open pages to make changes if we want. Finally, we start to look at issues. Issues are where a risk has materialized and had an impact on our business. We can look back over different periods of time. In this case, we're starting in November of 2014, and we're moving all the way up through March 24th of 2015. The tree diagram reflects the business entity hierarchy. Here we see the regions for global financial services. Global financial services has almost 50 issues associated, where corporate has only 6. And corporate sales child has 4, and IT has only 1, which means there's an issue associated directly with corporate because there are 6 there. We can go and take a look at what those 6 issues are in a table, and here you see the corporate alone at the top, and then corporate IT, and 3 corporate sales. The 4th is at the bottom. By scrolling down, we can see all of them. The issues work the same as the risks in that you can export the content to a spreadsheet and then work with that in Excel if you wanted to sort on different criteria, add annotations, or copy and paste them into emails for people to take a look at them. We include the URLs so that you can go back into open pages and explore them. Of course, the table that we displayed can also sort their contents by clicking on the column headings. These 2 columns show where the issue occurred and who is affected by it. We refer to this as impacting and impacted business units. Let's go back and explore these relationships. By clicking on the icon here, we can see the corporate issues, how they're distributed, and who they affect. So we have corporate sales has 2 issues, and they affect finance and commercial banking. Finance with 2 issues and commercial banking with 1. By clicking on finance, we can see those 2 issues, and here's the impacting and impacted information. Now let's take a look from the other perspective. Here we see that the issues contained in these business units only affect themselves. If we switch from corporate now up to global financial services as a whole, we can see all of the issues and how those distribute. So here in North America, there are 7 issues that break across these child business units. And we can see from an impacted perspective who is the most hurt by these different business units issues. So here in North American sales, at the bottom, we can see that there are 3 issues in commercial banking and 2 from finance that affected North American sales. We can take a look at bar charts and see how these issues distribute across various ratings. The red is the highest impact and the green is the least impact. There's a filter bar up at the top which allows us to change our focus, and as we change the filters, the charts change at the bottom to reflect the filtering in play. We can also change filters for the financial impact caused by these issues. We'll remove these filters and look at all of the issues. In this case, we may want to look at issues based on their processing status, open, closed, draft. We can remove the closed and draft filters and focus only on the open issues. We can also see these issues spread as a pie chart to see what business units had the most issues. And you'll see both of the charts update when we change our filters. We may want to look at issues based on categories and subcategories. Initially, let's take a look at financial integrity and reporting issues. We can see that there are 10 of those issues, and the highlighted chords show the relationship of that category to the subcategories. By clicking on the color associated with the category, we can highlight the subcategories that are affected by that category. If we change our focus to damage to physical assets, we can see that there are 2 issues affecting 2 subcategories. The chords or arcs show the number of issues from the category affecting the subcategory. I hope you've enjoyed the demo today. Thank you very much for your attention. Feel free to contact us